Now rolling. And all right. So Sergeant Sarazin, how's your day going?
Going very good. I don't get much sleep. I've been up since I don't know. I guess 2 o'clock in the morning. I run the pilot's breakfast every Thursday morning, which is today, and up at the Fairway. And I run a pilot's luncheon once a month at the Double Dragon. And of course, I founded a lot of clubs, and but that's today so far.
All right. So we'll start off with a pretty simple question, just easing us in. So how did you end up on Cape Cod?
Uh, we used to summer in Northampton, right on the Connecticut River, and it was nice there. The seaplanes. 1938, the hurricane of '38 filled the cottage with over a foot of mud. And my uncle, who owned the cottage, sold it. So then we started going to Onset, and I also vacationed in George City, Connecticut, where my godfather had hidden acres. It was a farmland, it was away from the road, and Onset was more or less day trips. And then the time came, and I guess it was just before the war or during the war. We used to go to Dennisport in tents and Campus Haven on I can't think of the name of the road right now, but Pettingill owned it. He owned Pettingill's store there, and it was a charter bowl. And so we used to go there, and then in 1951, no, after the war, right after the war, we started going to Eddie's Silver Camps, which were right next door to the Campus Haven on Old Wharf Road, which I couldn't think of a minute ago. And we went to Eddie's Silver Camps. Barbara Eddy was a classmate of mine, and we rented from her mother. And while there, my father was looking for property. He heard about an asparagus farm in Eastham. They were breaking up into house lots, and he inquired, and he bought 2 lots there. And he and I built, and had that place. That was 61 years ago. And then 33 years ago, I built on the lot next door that I owned, and I retired.
All right. So did you enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted right out of high school as soon as I graduated.
All right. Why did you pick the Marines?
Well, it's a funny thing. All my uncles were in the Army, except one was a Seabee. He was building runways while the fighting was going on Guam even. Another uncle of mine was captured in the Normandy invasion. He looked like a skeleton after the Allied forces freed him after the war. Another one of my uncles was 3rd Armored Division, and he was in the Battle of the Bulge. And they all thought I was going to the Army. My Uncle Mike was a great guy. I used to hear from him all the time. And when he found out I went in the Marines, he was quite disappointed. I was the first in the family to ever go in the Marines. My cousin Ellen Pepin went in the Marines, and a couple others. But I was the first one to go in the Marines, and I like the Marines because they protect you. You know they're going to bring your body back if you run amok. If you're wounded, they'll get you. You know they'll go out and get you. And the Army is more or less like that today, even. But the Marine Corps has been known for taking care of their men.
All right. So what was going through you served overseas, correct?
Oh, absolutely.
All right. So
2 years.
What was going through your head when you first flew out overseas to go fight?
Well, that was a funny thing because we flew out of Barbers Point on a C-54 4-engine transport plane, about, I don't remember quite how far, but the number 3 engine caught fire. It was blazing. And most of my team was sleeping, but I was sitting in the window right by that engine. I couldn't believe the flames, and the fuel was in the wing. And I grew up right near Wilkins Airport, where I eventually had a plane. And I knew darn well we were in trouble, but the pilot pulled the CO2, he put the fire out, and he feathered the engine. And he came on the intercom and told us nothing to worry about, you know, and it's true, there wasn't. We had 3 good engines. 20 minutes later, the engine number 4 on the starboard wing was spitting out huge chunks of carbon. No fire as such, but it was all covered with orange traces of fire in his carbon. He had to shut it right down. So now we've got 2 engines on 1 wing. That's quite an imbalance. So we made a very slow turn to the right because the engines were on that side. It'd be very difficult to turn the other way. And he said, not to worry, we haven't reached the point of no return. We're going back to Barbara's Point. Well, I was a little bit concerned because by then we were quite a ways out in the Pacific. But we got back to Barbara's Point, and we had left at night, and we saw the sunset, and then we got up high enough, we saw the sunset a second time. But anyway, coming back, we were 11 o'clock when we got back, and they put us up in a barracks there, and to work on a plane. And then at 3 in the morning, they woke us up. They had a plane ready for us. Well, you know, I grew up near airplanes, and I noticed this number on that plane is the same plane we had taken off in. We had the fire on. So how they ever changed the engines and flew that plane in that short a time, I don't know. I think we were the test flight. I think they just changed the engines. So without incident, we went out over the Pacific. Destination was Atami, Japan. Itsugi, Japan, then Atami. Yeah, there were 2 air bases there. We had a mid-stop at Guam and at Kwajalein because we dropped off mail there, as we do for the servicemen along the route. We got to Japan. Of course, we had a training for dealing with the Oriental people. We had all our shots. We got, I don't know if they're new rifles, they look new. We had to zero them in at a 300-yard battle range. At rifle range, we zeroed them in. And then we flew, by truck, we went to Camp Fisher. That's where we're staying at the Marine base. And then we flew to Incheon in Korea, way in South Korea. I think that was K1. And from there we flew up to K14, which I guess was Seoul. Well, anyway, when we got to Seoul, we had to wait to get a 6x, that's a 2.5-ton truck, to bring us to Incheon to get aboard a ship to go up to North Korea. But back then, you know, we'd never seen a helicopter up close. And right behind the hangar where we were waiting for our transportation, there were helicopters coming in, little H-13s. So I went out to see one around back, and that was quite a sight. It was, there were 2 Marines on litters on each side of the chopper. One of them had his pretty well leg destroyed with the bones sticking out, and the other one more or less stomach gone. I guess I don't think he survived. I don't think he was even alive then. But at that point, somebody said, "What the hell am I doing here?" You know? And that's when I realized it was me talking. I never talked to myself in my life, but I was quite disturbed. I was in good spirits until then. I walked back over to where my group was, and nobody noticed how quiet I was, but I was in deep thought at that point. Then we got on to LST, and we went out to Pangyang-do, and I don't remember what we were there for, But we had about 20,000 gallons of gasoline in 55-gallon drums all over the deck of this LST. And then we took off for North Korea. We went up to Chodo, and we let some of the troops off that were with us at Chodo. And in fact, we got off too. We got on an LCM to make a landing up there. We made our landing up there by the Taidong River at Sakto, and we were down there at command post. We met everybody. They took us up the long, long trail up the top of Hill 407, where we dug in. We lived like rats in a rat hole up there. And that's where we stayed up there, calling in artillery strikes and naval gunfire strikes. And every third day we could go down, shower, and get a hot meal. Of course, in wintertime, you don't go down and get an outdoor shower. I didn't anyway, but it wasn't bad. It wasn't like summertime where you sweat. And my first night there, I got up out of the sleeping bag, and I had to get up in the middle of the night. I went around the hill to relieve myself. I got back in my sleeping bag, and I never got warm again. It was so cold. So that day on, I never had anything to drink after noontime. So I'd go through the night, no problem then. And that's that point.
All right. So, what was your first assignment?
First assignment, well, I finished number 1 in my platoon, and I went into electronics school. And the governor of Massachusetts came in second highest in the platoon in the scoring, the examination tests, whatever you call it. And he was Arthur Tobin, and he went to radio school. I went to electronics school. I ended up anyway with radio. And that was at Great Lakes. Then we went to Pleasure Island, which is in San Francisco Bay, Yerba Buena Island. The Navy portion of it is Treasure Island, and awaiting assignment. And then from there we took a, let's see, for some reason I'm confused. Oh yeah, okay. We took the ship out to Camp Catlin in the Hawaiian Islands, and that's where we went through a lot further training, radio procedure, practicing fire missions with artillery and naval gunfire, and we were well trained in all that. The bracket system, where you surround your target with the rounds, and then you go into a fire for effect to wipe out the target, whether it's people, vehicles, or whatever you're trying to destroy. And so from there we took the C-54, where we had the problems. We flew to Japan and Korea. Whereas we went from California to Hawaiian Islands and an AKA, and APA is a troop ship. We went in a cargo ship, an AKA. Didn't have stabilizers, so it rolled like mad. And yes, I was very seasick.
All right. So, what did you do to become a sergeant? Like, was there any event in particular?
Well, in 1st Air and Naval Gunfire Liaison Company, all the training and everything, just before I went to Korea, I was promoted from PFC to corporal. And after I came home from the war, I got back in October of 1953, and then we took a battery of exams in January of 1954, and for advancement, and I passed, and I was awarded sergeant. As a sergeant, I had my own little room in the back of the barracks rather than sleeping with the rest of the troops. We were treated pretty good, but I still think the best job in the Marine Corps is a corporal.
All right. So, what was your happiest memory from the war?
Happiest?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I never ever gave that any thought. Gee. Had to be, we used to go to Pearl Harbor, get aboard a destroyer, the rubber boat. That's a different story. We used to take a 6-by, a truck, over to a beach on Oahu, and no, it's the same trip. I take that back. This is 67, 68 years ago. We went out on a destroyer with our rubber boat, and we inflated it. Well, they weren't like the little Zodiacs you have today. These were big, and they were heavy, very hard to handle. And it took us a couple hours to inflate them, even with the big pumps we had. So we inflated them, and we went in and made amphibious landings in a rubber boat. And we packed our radio gear in waterproof rubber bags. They snapped up tight. They rolled down and snapped up tight so no water got into the radio, so they'd still work. And of course, the surf in Hawaii wasn't very friendly. And usually we'd end up upside down with a boat and retrieving our gear, dragging it up to shore. And after we made a few runs with that, then a 6-by came back to bring us home, back to our base at Camp Catlin. They'd have a keg of beer for us. And that was a pretty happy moment, having a beer after that and letting the air out of the rubber boat, put it back in the truck, and they took us back. Now, the old Camp Catlin was the Marine Raiders in World War II. They did the same thing in the same camp, only they used a submarine. Well, they used to pull a rubber boat up through the hatch in a submarine and inflate it on a whatchamacallit. They did this at night. The training was done in the daytime, but to make a raid, they'd go in at night under cover of darkness. Well, funny thing, very funny. If you've seen any movies of submarines, they have a klaxon. When they dive or anything else they do, it goes aruga. Ever hear that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, the Marines started imitating that, believe it or not. They were saying aruga, and sailors were laughing at them, you know. That kind of died out, but one of the Marines from the Force Recon had heard this. And he picked it up, and no aruga, he went to ura, which you hear today. Mm-hmm. That's the origin of ura.
Wow.
Very few people know that. Not even Marines know that. I happen to talk to people way back then of where it came from. And so I got the history of that, and I love the fact that I had the history of ura, which we use today. And so they use a submarine. We use, I guess that was, answer your question, the happiest moment was when we had the beer party after the rubber boat drills.
All right. So to follow that up, what would probably be your darkest or most disturbing moment from the war?
That would have been when I saw the H-13 coming in with a wounded on it. Another thing, I don't like helicopters. The H-19s had no door. They had a bar on it. We'd go one hill to the next. You'd jump in and hold the bar. The guy behind them hold on their cartridge belts. I was the last one in, and I grabbed the 2 cartridge belts, and I was halfway out, so I stepped down to get further into the chopper. When I looked out, I realized we were 80 feet off the ground. Wow, so I held on to those cartridge belts to pull myself in harder, and I'm glad those guys were holding on. I almost met my demise that day. I'm glad they held on good, because we would have all gone out. And let's see, I'd say between the engines catching fire on the plane, almost falling out of the chopper, and especially the H-13, seeing the wounded, that turned my outlook on the war right then and there. But it worked out after that. It was all right.
All right. So, did you ever kill any Korean soldiers?
Oh yeah, a lot of them. Artillery. Yeah. Catch troops out in the open. Some of them got away. I didn't realize till recent years, because there was a place with a lot of trees, almost like an oasis. You see the North Korean troops down there by the beach, and you'd fire on them, and it all disappeared in that oasis, and you just pepper it with a fire for effect to just wipe them out. And it was a case of you kill them or they kill you. But I realized today they probably had tunnels there. After seeing the war in Vietnam, they might have gone into tunnels. In that case, a lot of them might have escaped, but not. That wasn't all of it. There were big rocks on the beach there, and we picked off a lot of them there with artillery. And there were two. There was one that got between two huge rocks. It was a narrow opening, and he got in there where he was safe, or he thought. But we were right in line with that. We put a round right in that, right in between those two rocks. And there was another day. They had a work crew going up. They had these big gun caves, and the doors were open. They're always closed. They opened them up to fire. Well, they had them open. They're going up to work on there. They had picks and shovels. I don't remember. There was 5 or 7 of them going up this little kind of a road up to it. There was dirt shelf like going up to it. So I called in a mission on that. They fired around, and after a couple of adjustments, I hit about 5 yards from the door. You know, you can only adjust 25 yards and 50 yards in elevation for your distance. I talked to the ship, and I said, if you could give me a 5-yard correction, 5 yards to the left, you'll probably be able to get them right in there. So they did. They gave me on away and splash when it was supposed to hit. And I was looking and looking and looking with the binoculars. Nothing at all. Lost round. All of a sudden, black smoke came pouring out of the cave. That round went right into the cave. And I don't know how many people were in that cave. I don't know how many. It was a regular battery of artillery. And the black smoke was from a lot of ammunition back there that went off too. And I guess that's about it. That's about all I want to cover. We did set a village on fire with Willie Peter. That's white phosphorus. We had Able Common, which was anti-aircraft shells. We had high explosive HE. We had Willie Peter, the white phosphorus. We had parachute flares. We had 5 types of ammo. Then we had several types of fuses, so we could make all kinds of combinations. You could have a fuse quick, a fuse delay, so the round buries itself in the ground if they're dug in to explode. You have fuse proximity. It's got a propeller on the front and a transmitter. And it gets near an airplane, close enough, and then it goes off and destroys a plane. So fuse quick, fuse delay, fuse proximity, fuse time. Fuse time would, you set it for so many seconds. If the troops, and you wanted to set an overhead burst, you knew the distance, you knew how many seconds it would take, have it go off right over there. You would give the ship the location, and their combat, what do they call it, CIC, I forget, Combat Information Center, they would figure out how many seconds set it off for that distance that we gave them.
So, who do you think would be the most influential person in your time in the military? Like, who was most influential to you? Like, who did you look up to?
Well, I would have to divide that up with, first of all, Sergeant Tucker, Sergeant Miller. They were master sergeants. And of course, Lieutenant Emmerich. Lieutenant Emmerich was my team officer in Korea. I didn't meet him until a few months before we went to Korea. We trained together with him, and one day they said, you know, we took turns. Different groups would go to Korea. 2/3 of us stayed back. And one day when they told us, okay, Korean detail, such as, wow, I knew right then that I was going to Korea. That was a slip up, I think. I don't know. Maybe it was intentional. But that's how I knew when my turn was up to go to Korea. And so Lieutenant Emmerich was, I would say, my biggest influence, because he was our team officer. And a very nice gentleman. He visited me at the Cape. Well, I met him. He was evaluating schools in Massachusetts, even though he lived in New Jersey. And he liked it, Massachusetts. He lived in he moved to Sturbridge. Then that's how I met him, interviewing the high school people like me. And so I told him about the Cape. So he came down. He loved it at the Cape. He couldn't believe it because the Jersey shores, all the cottages were on top of one another. Nice open area here. I live near the water in Eastham. So he looked around. He bought Brewster Green. He bought 2 different condos for him and his kids. And so he was nearby a couple of weeks every year. And of course, he came out every fall for the Marine Corps Ball. You know, and so I'd say Lieutenant Emmerich probably had the biggest influence on me.
Would you say he was your closest friend during the war?
Oh, no. You didn't even go out and drink with Marine Corps isn't like the Army. In the Marine Corps, you got to you hang around with your own. You don't have a private PFC going out on liberty with a sergeant. You know, a different level there. Corporal and up is a non-commissioned officer, and I mean, you just didn't. You mixed with your own kind. I guess my best friends were my same rank, of course, Max Sarazin and Roy Jones. And I know Roy Jones is going to see this interview. He's probably the only one that's still alive from my group. So yeah, we're very close. Me and Max Sarazin and Roy Jones.
So, what did you find to be the biggest struggle during the war, would you say?
During the war, okay, because the biggest struggle, of course, was Paris Island boot camp. That was, you wonder if you're going to make it, if you're going to graduate. But the biggest struggle, I'd say carrying radio gear. The Anchor 9 radio had a generator. We had a stool and crank it, and that thing weighed, I think, 65 pounds. I don't want to swear to it today because it's been too long. But we had a heavy, wide shoulder strap to carry that. The antenna group, the sections were very long. We had a lot of equipment to carry. 4 basic tools was a map, a compass, the binoculars. I think it was 3, but somebody said, how about the flashlight? Yeah, we did have a flashlight. Map and compass were the biggest thing. You had to get the coordinates of the target you're going to hit to feed them in. And you gave them distance. You could give them right, left, the distance, add, subtract, or up and down. You know, if you're firing at a cliff, you want to go up a little bit, you give them an up. Their computer, which was big on board the ship, it took care of the contours because, you know, you add and you should fire at a slope that's up. They add a little bit and it only moves a little bit. If it's a down slope, it'll go a long ways beyond the last round. So, I mean, what was the question again now? My most...
the biggest struggle of the war.
Biggest struggle was carrying that equipment. Yeah. During the war, I wasn't in Korea at the time. Was every month we had 1 or 2 20-mile hikes with a full field marching pack. That was heavy. And it was long, and they usually had a very fit lieutenant lead us. And they used to love to see that us younger kids had trouble keeping up with them.
All right. So, why did you leave the military?
Oh, I got married and I had left the active duty and I was in the reserves. And when I came home from the war, I was stationed at the Hingham Naval Ammunition Depot, a real good place anyway. But in 1954, I got transferred from there into the reserves. And then in 1959, Vietnam was getting pretty hot, and I was married and everything, and I knew I'd be away all the time. It wasn't fair to my wife. So I accepted my discharge at that time.
How did you adjust to life outside of the military?
Very tough, very tough. It's 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 a completely different lifestyle, as you know. I mean, you're treating people a lot differently, and you always didn't use the best language in civilian life as a result. So I mean, yeah, a lot of adjustment there, a lot. And I got an email this week. They had a thing about the problems with a adjusting to civilian life, and I read that thing, and well, it fit us to a T.
Hmm. All right. So, what did you do after you left the military?
I went back into a jewelry shop for a short hitch while I got a job in a textile mill. My father was a textile printer. I worked in the back of the print machine, a back tender, and feeding the rolls and putting color in the back boxes for printing. And until there was an ad in the paper for draftsmen that Raytheon needed them, they had the Hawk missile program, and I had done a lot of drafting. I took 4 years of it in high school. I loved drafting, and so I went up for an interview, and they had battery exams you had to take. Well, my car wasn't very good. My friend, who was my flight instructor, I told him about it. We decided to go to Raytheon, have an interview. We went up there. We filled out the paperwork. We had to show up on a Saturday morning, I don't know, 10 o'clock, and not Waltham, in Watertown, and at the old Stanley Steamer plant where they built Stanley steamers. And there was, we were notified, we both got accepted. There were 200 applicants and they accepted 20. And I was very fortunate that both me and my friend Red, who had a Volkswagen Beetle, they were brand new in this country at the time. So we had a great transportation, and yeah, we got there, and we went through that school and got into the engineering development program. So I went to Northeastern. As long as I had high grades, they paid for it, and I got a $50 book allowance and everything. And I graduated with highest honors. Became a mechanical engineer at Raytheon.
Mm-hmm. So, we've hit the 30-minute mark, so we're going to start to wrap it up. So, I just want to close with one final question. If a close family member, like a grandson or a great-grandson or a granddaughter, came up to you and told you that they were thinking about joining the military, what would you say to them? Like, what advice would you give?
You know, I thought about that a few times, and it would more or less depend. Some wars are very barbaric, and others are not. I'd be very concerned about their safety, because I know what I went through. And I'd say probably the best deal for them would probably be the Navy, aboard a ship, rather than ground troop fighting. I was lucky I wasn't in the infantry. Me and the governor's nephew didn't go into the infantry from the platoon.
All right, so I think that just about does it. So thank you very much, Sergeant Sarazin.
You're very welcome.
And the interview was great, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Okay, same to you. Yeah, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you.